Welcome, everyone. I hope you all stay healthy and strong during this difficult time. My name is Siampani, and I'm a dissertator at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm thrilled to be part of this virtual MTNA conference and share my project with you all. Flow with a Score introduces a new idea for the applied lesson that can be practiced both in the practice room as well as away from the instrument. Using the fundamental principles of Laban movement analysis, my aim is to help each performer connect with their inner bodies, the gesture, the music score, as well as the space surrounding them while performing. Laban's principles have already been studied and applied to music performance through Charles Cambetta's dissertation entitled Conducting Outside the Box, a fresh approach to conducting gesture through the principles of Laban movement analysis, as well as Paula Savidu's dissertation entitled Embodying Musical Flow. Together, we're going to explore this Laban system in two new directions. First, for physical awareness in our instrumental technique, and second, for freedom in interpretation and an introduction to musical improvisation. Laban movement analysis, or else called LMA, is an analytical notational system developed by Rudolf Laban with a goal to retrain the body for optimum performance. Rudolf Laban was a dancer, a choreographer, and a movement theoretician analyst who laid the foundation for 20th century European modern dance. Born in Bratislava and traveling frequently to European cities along with his dad, Laban exposed himself to folk dances of different countries. Apart from his passion for dance, his other interests included music composition and piano playing, crystallography, and painting. Laban held many important positions in theaters and opera houses, but he was mostly known for his movement choirs that included thousands of non-dancers and amateurs, thus presenting dance movement as a means of self-expression to a wider public. As his ideologies were in conflict with the Nazis, he was forced to leave for England to avoid being arrested by the Gestapo. During his time in England, he worked with factory workers who, because of the nature of their work, were used to executing repetitive movement patterns, exactly like musicians. Through his system, Laban managed to develop ways of releasing excess tension, thus improving efficiency through easeful movements. His work also helped establish movement education as a curricular component in schools. Laban's system is presented in 4 categories, which include the body, the shape, the space harmony, and the effort. Under the body category, Laban includes all changing relationships of different body parts when moving. With shape, he organizes these changes of body positions. With space harmony, he describes the relationship of the different body movements to the surrounding space. And with the effort, he tries to express inner intent and the resulting quality of movement. In this session, we will first dive into the space category, as I feel that the performer surrounding space is a matter rarely addressed by music teachers, as well as to a more free and improvisatory embodiment of different articulations, tempos, dynamics, and characters of pieces using Laban's shape and effort qualities. The space harmony of the LMA system identifies the space in which we're moving and how it relates to our center. In order to better describe movement, Laban created geographies of space that allow for a systematic description of the three-dimensional motion of our body. These geographies can help the mover orient and organize more efficiently his gestures into space. Laban defined the sphere of movement space immediately adjacent to our bodies as kinesphere. In other words, kinesphere is outlined as an imaginary bubble that circles every movement and can be reached without taking a step. Take a moment now as I'm talking to explore your kinesphere at your current position by opening your feet, stretching your hands, lengthening your torso. Feel free to rotate your body, to twist and make any gestures on the spot, always remembering not to take a step. This imaginary bubble that surrounds you like an aura and defines your most personal space is your kinesphere. The kinesphere consists of three concentric spheres: the near-ridge space, defined as the area closest to the body, the far-ridge space as the area furthest from the body, and the middle-ridge space as the area in between. Actions such as tilting, twisting, bending belong, of course, to the far-ridge kinesphere, while other motions like rearranging my hair would belong to the near-ridge kinesphere. So next time you practice, try to take a moment to analyze the musical gestures based on the kinesphere to which they belong. Taking as an example a simple ascending scale on the piano, you will discover how you start the motion close to the body in your middle kinesphere, and then how you need to lean to the right side as you ascend to the higher register, and you will reach the far-ridge kinesphere. You will then notice that any passage that requires you to modify your initial position actually belongs to the far-ridge kinesphere. With this rational analysis of the physical movement that each passage requires, musicians can identify that the reason that some passages look challenging and more risky during a performance may lie to the kinesphere they actually belong. By exploring your kinesphere away from your instrument, notice which motions feel easier or safer to you. You may be surprised with the discoveries you make for yourself. Then go back to your instrument and try ascending and descending scale-wise passages and arpeggiated motifs. You will see that you will find similarities between your preferences in everyday motions and your technical exercises. The most fundamental orientation in space follows the three axes that are perpendicular to one another: the vertical, the horizontal, and the sagittal. The vertical axis can be traced by exploring downward gravitational pull towards the feet and upward pull towards the head, initiating, of course, the movement from the spine. The horizontal axis can be traced with side-to-side motions, more clearly conceived as opening and closing. For example, by stretching your right hand to the right, you open your body and you expand your kinesphere, while when you reach your right hand towards the left side, you close the body and you minimize your kinesphere. Following the same logic, by pulling forward and backwards, you can trace your sagittal axis. When you cross all three axes together, you will notice that these three axes not only represent all possibilities and all directions of movement, but also that you always need to return to the center before continuing. This observation made Laban express that dimensional tensions give a feeling of stability. You can easily explore that any motion that stretches your body needs to be released either into the initial position or flow into another movement. By taking this discovery a step forward and associating it with music, next time you go through your music score, take a moment to relate the tendencies of the melodic lines. You will discover then that extremities, such as big lips, for example, resolve always with descending scales or glissandi, or how one hand balances another in certain passages. Stress in music always resolves sooner or later. So instead of repeating the same passage again and again, I suggest a different approach by trying to analyze a passage focusing on its tendencies of stress and release, trying to see if you can find a place of balance with your other hand or your torso. Laban associated each movement with certain qualities, associating space with time, weight, and effort. Thus, each direction of the three axes has a certain affinity and intent. Starting again with the vertical axis, Laban associated vertical low with sinking and strength, and vertical high with rising and lightness. Following with the horizontal axis, Laban associated horizontal right with indirectness and widening, and horizontal left with narrowing and directness. Lastly, in the sagittal axis, he paired sagittal front with advancing and sustainment, and sagittal back with retreating and quickness. While it's not absolute that these combinations go always together, you can find examples in music literature that prove this exact same thing, as we will discover later. Combining two-dimensional pulls between two of these three axes creates what Laban called cardinal planes. These planes are created from these two-dimensional poles, are described in this figure that you can see in your screens, and these are the vertical or door plane, the horizontal or table plane, and the sagittal or wheel plane. By noticing and understanding these planes, you will discover that when you play the piano, for example, our arm movements happen mostly in the horizontal plane, while the upper torso movements take place in the vertical and sagittal planes. For example, any scale or arpeggiated gesture with our hands that takes place close to the keyboard in the horizontal plane. However, when a crossing of hands is required, then the upper torso and the whole hand needs to move to the sagittal plane. The vertical plane is always present with every lengthening and shortening of our spine in each breath we take in every single phrase of the piece. Each plane bisects the kinesphere, dividing the space around the body into front and back, right and left, high and low. Laban understood that for movement to make sense, it must progress organically, as the continuum of gestures is unstoppable. By experiencing these movements away from the instrument, we can clarify its gesture, and we can manage to develop efficient ways of transitioning from one choreography to another without causing awkward movements in our bodies and by extension to our music making. As we stated above, kinesphere, as noted by Laban, is a hypothetical bubble of empty space that is changeable. The mover can literally create the shape of his kinesphere while moving. This expansion and shrinking of the kinesphere was developed under the term shape flow by one of Laban's students named Warren Lamb. As kinesphere cannot actually be seen, the shape flow can be studied only when there is a change in the range of motion in the body, either growing or shrinking. But this motion description is less about the goal and more about the journey. When Laban first began to develop his system, his goal was to examine and record the movement. Since that proved impracticable for so many reasons, as motion is described by many complicated patterns, Laban notation today is written in terms of destination, something that's also happening in music notation as well. Taking, for example, any music scores, but especially the ones that are written in the Baroque and classical periods of music that were not meant to carry heavy expressive markings, you will find that composers always write down the final dynamic they think of a passage as the final destination, and they leave the rest of the journey to be imagined by the performer. Besides, this is the beauty of each individual interpretation, how each performer treats this journey, this space from one note to another before he arrives to what the composer demands as the final dynamic, the final destination. In Laban's words, the dancer's gift lies in his ability to observe the form of things and their directional tendencies, and his ability to translate these perceived tensions with dance gestures. Using Laban's language myself, I find that a musician's gift lies in his ability to identify the shapes, structures, and tendencies of each harmonic and melodic line, and his dexterity into communicating the appropriate emotion through uninterrupted pacing and flow. Exploring Laban's shape terminology through music, I associate droit with musical scales, ascending and descending of any mode, ouverte with arpeggiated motifs, tortille with embellishments and ornaments that surround the notes, and ronde with the circular shape of a phrase or the form of a piece. Using these four aforementioned formal elements as a basis of shaping can serve as the basis for all innumerable combinations that can be made in music making. Exploring these four qualities away from the instrument by embodying each shape individually or with partners can help students feel the tendency of each motif in a free improvisatory manner without any teacher's prejudice of what the composer communicates with it. Laban once wrote that the dancer moves not only from place to place, but also from mood to mood. Since this is absolutely the case and the most important element of music making and performing, I dedicate this last part of this presentation in exploring musicianship in terms of dynamics, articulation, tempo, and character through Laban's effort qualities. Movement is definitely a psychophysical phenomenon that involves the whole person. Every motion reveals an inner feeling, and every inner attitude becomes visible through an effort, through emotion. Musicians do not have a say on why something is done, since most of the times the music they're executing was actually composed centuries before they were even born. Their profession depends on their ability to translate what's written by analyzing how their approach can be more efficient and more communicative of the specific emotion. This takes most of our practicing and most of our preparation time anyways before we go into performance mode. The clearer the inner intention is, the clearer the impulse is, the more successful the communication of the musical gesture will be. The four elements of effort, according to Laban, are space, weight, time, and flow. Of course, the dynamic nature of the movement causes these four factors to appear combined in clusters instead of one at a time. Effort factors are not only visual descriptors of movement, but also a reflection of inner thoughts and states of mind. In other words, through effort, inner expression becomes outer movement. Its effort quality is described by Laban as a continuum between the two extreme ranges of indulging, less resistance, and condensing, more resistance. As you can see, Laban describes flow in terms of progression. So we have the two extremes, free progression and bound progression. Time in terms of decision, and again, we're between sustained and sudden time. Weight in terms of intention, and we have again the two extremes, light and strong weight. And lastly, space in terms of attention, and again, we're between indirect and direct attention and space. When movement is described by free flow, the outpouring of energy is unrestrained, as in children's running. When movement is described by bound flow, the energy is restrained, as when we pick up a delicate object. Thinking in musical terms, and taking as an example my recent performance of Debussy's second set of preludes, I'm going to give you as an example his eighth prelude on Dean, in which the bound and the free flow are succeeding one another continuously from the beginning of the piece. In movements with sudden time, a certain feeling of urgency is also expressed, as in the first measures of Debussy's third prelude, La Puerta del Vino. When movement is expressed in a sustained time, however, a feeling of relaxation and lingering is expressed, as later on when Debussy uses exactly the same motif but describing a different feeling. Lastly, attention to space is a bit challenging to associate with a performer's gestures, as classical music requires direct attention to space in every single passage we execute. Either it is a large leap or just a small interval apart, each note carries such a lot of thought and analysis before its execution. Therefore, while one can experience indirect space in many everyday motions, such as conversations or even when walking, in classical music, each movement is direct and always serves a threefold purpose. One part of it vanishes into the past, another part is momentarily present, and a third part will presumably follow and complete the movement. Next time you practice, I suggest a different strategy. Try to think in terms of time, weight, and space in order to decide your articulation, your dynamics, your shaping choices. Structure your practicing with the guidelines of decision, intention, and attention on every single interval and every single passage. Combining imagery with LMA terminology can prove helpful because of its objective nature. Using this terminology as an analytical strategy of a piece and its meaning can prove more successful than imposing to the student of a specific emotion behind its gesture. The analysis, as you could see, is purely descriptive of the physical movements required and goes beyond technical descriptions and emotional content. Through LMA, the teacher can identify directions and shapes in the music score and correlate them with specific movement patterns, leaving room for the student to create his own imagery and emotional intent. Thank you so much for listening to me. I hope I gave you a few ideas. I look forward to get any questions, any feedback that you have, please email me. And I really look forward to see you again in another conference. Stay strong, everyone. Stay healthy.